you talk to 3 different people, you get 3 different answers. So even the people that work for the federal government can't read and understand their own rules, it's certainly hard for small business owners and taxpayers to understand the rules. So we see that firsthand. I'd like to start my questioning with Dr. Cheek. Thank you. Understand you were a federal employee, so you got to see it on both sides. How much progress do you think is being made in implementing plain language in the federal government, and how much more needs to be done?
Well, it's discernible progress. You know, I can see it in several different agencies. I think Veterans Benefits has made a lot of progress. NIH is trying. IRS is actually trying. But they have barely scratched the surface. And it's a very difficult thing to do. Plain language is not easy. The outcome looks easy, but getting there is very difficult. And one thing it requires is clear thought. And we don't have enough of that in the federal bureaucracy. So you can't write clearly if you're not thinking clearly. And a lot of people are afraid of it. It's change. It's big change. It's going to be very difficult to get there. So, as I said, I think we've barely begun, except that people know, they've heard the word now. 10 years ago, no one would have known what you were talking about. Now a lot of people have heard about plain language. So, that's the first step. And there are now enough examples that we could show people what it looks like. There are a lot of studies that give you data showing why it's valuable. So we're off to a good start, but there's just a tremendous way to go.
Do you see any drawbacks for modifying IRS forms?
I don't see any drawbacks at all. It would make work for a lot of people, and it would then in the long run it would save taxpayers a lot of time, and I think you would get, as we've heard here today, you would get people complying better with the requirements.
Do you see any additional cost or on the other hand, any cost savings by simplifying forms at the federal level?
I think in the long run the cost savings will be tremendous. I think the process of getting there's going to be some costs. In the late 70s, the British government started a major project where they redid a lot of forms. It was called the Forms Project. And when it was done, someone in the government, and this is in ancient history now just about, but someone in the government said that if everything we did in the government was in plain English, we would save 20% of the federal budget. So I think in the long run, there is savings of that magnitude to be made from plain language.
Are documents or the instructions to comply with the documents the bigger problem, or they're equally problematic?
Well, they're equally problematic. I mean, I think when you get a federal form that's 2 pages long and you get 16 pages of instructions, no one will read the instructions. That's, what are you thinking when you write 16 pages of instructions? No one will read it. They'll fill out the form to the best of their ability and send it off. If it's not right, they'll either not get a benefit, they'll not pay the right amount, they might get penalized. The agency has to call them up, get it straightened out. It befuddles me how we have gone on so long getting in a deeper and deeper hole with government communication.
Thanks, Dr. Cheek. Ms. Grunmeyer, thank you for being here. I'm actually a respiratory therapist myself and owned a DME company before coming to Washington. And when I owned that company, I had about 2/3 of my employees doing paperwork, about 1/3 of my employees taking care of patients. There's something fundamentally wrong. When your business is to take care of patients and provide quality care, and you have to spend more time taking care of paperwork for the government. Who in your agency is responsible for keeping up with all the paperwork requirements?
Well, the nurses themselves are responsible for the OASIS when they go out and do an admission for a new patient. They're responsible for giving the notices to the patient that they're responsible for. They're responsible for the HIPAA. They're responsible for all the things that we're required to give them at the time of admission, and then making sure that in the time frame required, they continue up with that. I do have clinical supervisors in my office who make sure that the nurses are doing what they want to do, what they're supposed to do, not what they want to do.
How much time do you think, on a percentage basis, does a nurse actually spend taking care of patients, and how much percentage of time do they spend taking care of paperwork?
I would guess that probably 1/3 of their time is paperwork, and two-thirds patient care.
Thank you. The chairman has a very good piece of legislation in front of you. His bill focuses on plain language in forms and documents. Do you think we need to expand on that and actually include regulations published in the Federal Register?
Oh, yeah. The Federal Register is difficult to interpret, and you know, then it's not just the Federal Register, then you have CMS, and we have CAHABA, and we have inspections and appeals, and we have OSHA, and we have, you know, the FDA. There's more than just one governing body looking over our shoulders, and everybody wants a different thing. There's a different interpretation.
I'm sure you have to deal with ICD-9 coding.
Oh, yeah.
And understand that's going to go from ICD-9 to ICD-10. Who does that for you?
My clinical supervisors work with the nurses. We've spent probably about 8 to 10 days in the last year sending people to those classes to get much better versed at that, as our movement is to be paid by the coding being part of what they're doing. So, you know, we want to ensure that it's right, it's stacked correctly now. I mean, there's a lot of new things coming with coding down the pikes to home care nurses.
Thank you. Now, if I could ask Mr. Hall just a few questions. If you know, how much do small business owners spend on compliance with the tax code? Do you have any idea how much it costs an average small business?
Well, again, just in preparing their tax return, the IRS estimates that it's 57 hours just to do their tax return. I think you had mentioned earlier, or the chairman had mentioned, that can be estimated at $50 an hour, $75 an hour. Those two numbers would be $2,500 to $3,700 just to prepare the tax return. That doesn't count getting their records in order necessarily, keeping track of those, researching those. Doesn't include sending out 1099s if they have a relationship with independent contractors. So the word I would use would be substantial. Don't want to add any other non-plain language to the conversation, but it's definitely substantial.
How hard would it be for the IRS to revamp their forms to plain language?
Well, I think it would be easy, and I say easy. There are still certainly issues of the complexity of the tax code itself. That's a much bigger issue, maybe more difficult to solve because there are so many competing demands on the tax code. So to begin with, the tax code is complicated, so by definition some of the forms are going to be. But they have proven the ability to accomplish simplification through the items I mentioned before. An easier Form 944, which gives the small business taxpayer one annual payroll tax return rather than having to do one each quarter. Even the quarterly payroll tax return has been revamped with plain English, and they did an extremely effective job at that, even the 940 as well. So I think they have proven that that task can be accomplished. But I think Dr. Cheek mentioned that at some level, people won't accomplish that task unless they are required to do so. Their commitment to small business through their website, I think they've done an outstanding job, but that was also somewhat reactive because as the internet came along, it was demanded of them. That's why I'm so encouraged with this type of legislation, because it is no longer reactive. It is no longer their choice. If they were required to have those new forms, any revamping of forms required to be in plain language, I think that's the emphasis they need to accomplish the task.
Do you see any drawbacks from modifying IRS documents or forms?
I can't see any drawbacks. Again, back to the only issue would be the complexity in the tax code. Having changes in the tax code or complexities for larger businesses, problems that small businesses don't face, that may translate into another set of forms. We have a Form 1040 now, which is everyone can use. Over the years, the IRS has developed a Form 1040A, which doesn't have as many lines on it, a little bit easier to do. They also have a 1040EZ, which is easy, supposedly. That may be an option to separate some of the more complex issues for businesses in general from those issues faced by small business, and that could be a solution.
Thank you. Mr. McCracken, how do most small businesses go about finding assistance in filling out forms and documents for the federal government?
Well, it's frankly, I think, a little haphazard. I think many of them begin, I think, the process of, if they've determined they're not going to be able to figure it out themselves, they usually ask colleagues. They ask other business owners they know. It's a relatively informal process. And then, of course, they often turn to the professionals they already have in their employ. If they have a CPA, if they have an attorney they already use, they obviously turn to those people as well first. And sometimes those people are able to help them, and sometimes they can refer them to other places that can.
Okay, thank you.